From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and in every Blue Sky episode, we'll be speaking to leaders, researchers, and thinkers whose stories and insights will remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. This Blue Sky conversation is another of several we've had on the importance of restoring a greater sense of community in our society. My guest today learned the value of community support from his parents and his family's heritage in India. Teju Ravilochan's parents immigrated to the United States in the 1980s and came to thrive here only after the support and generosity of so many of their new neighbors. Teju took the valuable lessons passed down from his mother and father and channeled them into his life's work. Teju Ravilochan is the founder of GatherFor, a nonprofit grounded in a vision that, in community, we have all that we need. Today, GatherFor organizes neighbors in Brownsville, Brooklyn into teams of 5 to support one another unconditionally. These neighbors draw on their own lived experience to navigate food, job, and housing insecurity by pooling funds to pay bills, watching each other's kids, sharing resources, celebrating birthdays, accompanying one another in difficulty, and more. Prior to GatherFor, Teju was co-founder and former CEO of Uncharted, originally titled Unreasonable Institute. He's a Forbes 30 Under 30 entrepreneur, an Inc. Magazine 30 Under 30 entrepreneur, and a TEDx speaker. I hope you enjoy this inspiring and thought-provoking conversation with Teju Ravilochan as much as I did. Teju Ravilochan, thank you for joining the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thank you so much, Bill, for having me.
It is a great pleasure to have you on the show, and I am really admiring of your work. But before we get into what you're currently doing at GatherFor, I'd love to get a sense for what you're all about, your upbringing, and what you think it is in your life that has led you to do this incredible work that you're doing today.
I think a big part of it is my family, my childhood, my heritage, my ancestry. My parents came from India. They immigrated here in 1985, right before I was born in 87. And they were trained as doctors, but the United States doesn't accept foreign medical licenses. So they weren't able to practice medicine when they got here. And India only allowed them to leave the country with $200. They had $200.
Wow.
They had a couple suitcases and themselves and their education. But they, arrived and didn't have a place to stay. So my uncle was good enough to put them up for a while. And then my dad learned about this neurosurgeon. He was a neurosurgeon, my dad, but he learned about this guy named Stuart Schneck, who ran a neurosurgery center nearby in Cleveland and was a connected person who could help him find a toehold to get started. So he'd waited outside of his office many days in a row trying to get an audience with him, couldn't get it to happen, but one day got into the elevator and Stuart Schneck walks in. He's like, I keep seeing you outside my office. My dad essentially makes an elevator pitch.
Nice.
And the guy was excited about it and invited my dad into his office, made a call for him, got my dad a posting in Denver, Colorado, which then my dad, I was born in Cleveland during this time. And then my dad moved us to Denver where I grew up. And when we arrived, my parents were able to participate in this special affordable housing program through which they were able to make a $500 down payment on a house and get a house for us to live in. And then the furniture that we had, was donated from colleagues at my dad's hospital that he started working at. My parents did an amazing thing to live in a completely new country, move across the world, start a life there.
Yes.
And you could say, they lived the American dream. They started from literally nothing and something blossomed. But of course, they had education, they had their values, they had their ancestry that shaped and inspired them. And then when they arrived here, there was help for them at every critical juncture from community, whether it was my uncle or Stuart Schneck or the government's federal housing program at the time, or colleagues at the hospital, and so many other acts of kindness, our life had really been shaped by that. And I think it was really beautiful. My parents always were clear about the support that they got from a very young age with us kids as they told us about their story coming here. And so I grew up with this idea that, the American dream is not actually self-sufficiency, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The American dream is very much a blessing of community. And so that was always a thing that shaped me, and something I was confused by when I heard people talking about we can do it on our own, we can be self-sufficient. And that's always been a really, a deep place of inquiry for me, reconciling with the narrative I'd commonly hear about the American dream versus the reality that my family had experienced
Yes.
growing up here.
So did your dad, was he ultimately practicing medicine? Or
Yes.
how
My
did that
dad
work?
practiced neurology
Okay.
here in the United States for 40 years, just retired last year,
Oh,
actually.
wow.
Now he's a full-time grandpa,
Nice,
which he's
nice.
happy about. Yeah.
Okay, so growing up, did you think about medicine, or what other things interested you before you did this kind of work?
Yes, I was definitely intrigued by medicine. I took an EMT course and was pretty excited about it. And then I also spent a lot of time traveling, especially to India. Because of my ancestry, I was always wanting to connect with my roots. And there was a trip I took in college to India that really made me not want to do medicine anymore and made me want to look at other things. And I think that's where I really changed my mind. I mean, there's a couple of trips to India that were really influential in there, but yes, I flirted with medicine, but it was India that somehow made me change my trajectory.
Okay, so out of college, what were you first pursuing?
Um, right out of college, I started something called Unreasonable Institute, which with other friends at the time, Daniel Epstein, Tyler Hartung, and a few other friends, Vladimir and Nikhil. We wanted to address inequities in the world, but we weren't sure how. And we also wanted to create sort of like a school for those who wanted to do that. And so we wound up setting up essentially a program for social entrepreneurs who were starting either for nonprofit organizations to address poverty, climate related issues, other issues of injustice around the world. And we would bring them together with mentors and funders. We'd all stay in a house together over the summer and support these early stage ventures to take shape. So I helped start that organization and ran it for about 9 years, and then left in 2017 in December.
And where did the idea for GatherFor come from?
So GatherFor is a lot of different things I think shaped GatherFor, but probably the first seed of GatherFor came from a trip I took to India when I visited villages in my mom's home state of Tamil Nadu. And I visited some coastal areas that had been affected by the 2004 tsunami, who were receiving attention from a lot of international NGOs to help rebuild after the devastating tsunami that happened. I just had the privilege of speaking with people about what their lives were like, what they hoped for, what their worries were. And I was surprised, honestly, to hear that people really loved their lives. They described in detail that their days essentially looked like waking up and their kids running out of the house and going and finding the other kids, and then just all taking care of each other and playing with each other the whole day. So the kids had their own sort of world. There was no babysitter there, but there were older kids and younger kids, and they, would minister to wounds if anyone got hurt, and they would, just watch out for each other and generally have a great time together. Then the adults would cook together. They'd spend time in the fields together. They would sing songs. They were out in nature in beautiful weather. They loved this. They were connected to themselves, each other, to nature. And of course, they had inconveniences like there weren't nearby schools, there wasn't running water, there wasn't electricity, but they didn't think of those things as inconveniences. These were just facets of life. And so the journey to the river to fetch water was actually a community activity, because you would walk with the others in the village and you'd fill up your pots and you talk the whole way. So if you took that out of the day, it was a lost chance at connection. So people were very, very happy. And as these international NGOs came in and were trying to modernize, I heard one NGO describe how they'd installed toilets in the village and nobody used the toilets, essentially because the women of the village would go to the outskirts of the village every day around 4 o'clock. And it was an outing. It was a social experience for them. If you put the toilet right there, it's very convenient, but it eliminates that social opportunity. And so central to these villages and their cultures was this idea of belonging and community at every moment. And modern conveniences really were keeping people apart or not giving people that reason to come together. They were less drawn to them. And so, there was this idea that the Indian village needs to look like the West, but I really started to wonder if it's the West that needs to look like the Indian village.
Interesting.
And so that's one of the things that inspired me. And then after I left Unreasonable Institute, one of my curiosities was about how we had been trying to address the needs of various human beings in various places in a piecemeal fashion. And I can say more about that, but essentially, everyone wants everything. Everyone wants for their loved ones to have everything. You don't just want for your child to have clean water or good food or a safe place to live or health insurance or a good education or good friends. You want all of those things for yourself and for your loved ones. And yet we start organizations, we start initiatives that are focused on each of these issues, but that don't necessarily address the totality. And so some of these things are intersectional, meaning that if you are getting sick from drinking contaminated water, it's hard for you to go to school and access your education, for instance. If you don't have childcare at home for your children, it's hard for you to go to work and express your gifts in the economy or that sort of thing as well. So by addressing issues in a piecemeal fashion, we actually don't meet people as the whole beings that they are. And it really made me curious about what does that? And the answer I kept coming back to was community, because in cultures like in this Indian village or in native cultures that I studied, indigenous cultures like the Blackfoot in Canada or in Montana in the United States, there was such holisticness because community was considered the source of all of our needs being met. Who housed us, who fed us, who watched our kids, who taught us to sing, who, helped picked us up when we fell down. It was always community. That was the place where all these needs were met. And now in the United States, that is not our culture. Our culture is we meet our needs through money and not through other people. And when we earn our own living, we don't see the fact that our homes were also built by others. Our roads, our food was grown by farmers. Our kids are raised by teachers who are not us. We are actually still being cared for by community. But we have this idea that it's money that's caring for us and we've earned that money. So we're really caring for ourselves. So all of these things made me think the experience in the Indian village, my study of Native communities, what I'd learned in Unreasonable Institute about the intersectionality of these human issues. We need to center community in what we do. How do we go about that? And so that was the question that was at the heart of GatherFor and still what is driving us right now.
There's a lot to digest here. I'll start with the lessons Teju learned from his parents. As I've said before, immigrants are in many ways the ultimate optimists. And you can now check that box if you have it on your Blue Sky bingo card. While his parents had been trained as doctors in India, these credentials weren't accepted in this country. But the support they received from their community here helped get them on their feet and back on a positive professional course. While rugged individualism is often held up as the American ideal, the experience of his parents has led Teju to say today that the American dream is a blessing of community. Watching tsunami survivors rally from this tragedy also reinforced these beliefs and led him to conclude that while many push the country of India to emulate the West, there be value in the Western nations learning lessons from neighbors helping neighbors in India. Teju also raises his provocative belief that the solution to most of our problems is community, but our society preaches the notion that money will take care of them. Getting back to our conversation, I wanted Teju to discuss this concept a little more.
We undervalue here in the United States what it means to be able to call someone up and talk about your day. You know, what it means to have a grandma in your house to help watch your kids, you know, what it means to, you know, learn from your children and see them as guides and teachers. We all have roles to play, you know, and our culture, in my view, has centered money. You know, there's a Seneca elder, Terry Cross, and he says culture is a group or a people's preferred way of meeting its needs. And so our preferred way in the United States, you know, you may agree or disagree with this, Bill, I'm curious, is money. That's our preferred way of meeting our needs. How do we get housing? How do we get education? How do we get childcare? We pay for these things, right? My parents, their families never paid for childcare for them. It is built in because aunts, uncles, cousins, older siblings were in the house, and they lived together in a community.
Yeah.
But we have now made that something that is the realm of a professional. We pay someone to do that,
Right.
and you know, that's great. That's an opportunity for someone to earn an income and a livelihood. I'm not trying to make that wrong. I'm only saying that, you know, in doing that alone, we have lost a lot, and we keep relegating our elderly increasingly to nursing homes, for example, where we lose their gifts and their contributions to our cultures, as one example of how maybe our culture has again centered money and not community. Whereas in a place like India, my family's from, your grandparents, you know, they don't go to nursing homes. I mean, of course they exist in India,
Sure.
and unfortunately increasingly so, but they mostly live in the home until they die.
Yeah.
And they are with you the whole time, and you care for them. And that's the way that it works there. And so there's a chance for us to ask ourselves, is this the culture that we really want? You know, our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, has said that we have a loneliness epidemic. And I think that we're not only lonely, but we're not meeting all of our needs because we are undervaluing community and we're overvaluing financial wealth.
Fascinating. And you know, and I think about it too. This country hasn't always been this way. I mean, 100 years ago, there was 3 generations in most homes, and you know, grandma's upstairs, and you know, babysitting when needed, and you had that intergenerational wisdom passed down, and all of that. It's also reminding me a little bit of, so there's the, as you said, addressing things with money. There's also been this sort of almost active moving away from community. I'm thinking about Bowling Alone and Robert Putnam and his work. I've talked to Pete Davis about, he's got an incredible film on this subject. And for whatever reason, just as a culture, we're also just not joining clubs. We're not in faith communities the way we used to be. So there's sort of the family taking care of each other. There's the neighborhood taking care of each other. And then these other ways we used to make community just aren't as big a part of our lives as they used to be. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, I am not an expert. You know, I would invoke the research that you just named from people like Robert Putnam. Um,
Yes.
but yes, I think so, and I think it's that there's increasing pressure on people to make money. So you
Oh,
go to
yeah.
your job and you spend all day, you're in meetings, you're on calls, you're working hard, you know, and you're exhausted. You haven't had time for yourself. What do you think? What do you feel? Have you been able to move your body? Have you slept well? Have you eaten? You know, all of these things are hard. And then what time and energy is there to go to bowl with your friends or even call a friend,
Yeah.
right? And so these things are interconnected. And not only that, but you know, because we're doing things alone now that we used to do together, we are more tired. We are more exhausted. You know, we used to watch kids together, right? For as one
Yeah.
visceral example. And now
Right.
I don't know how people raise kids, honestly, in this country. How do you work
Yeah.
and spend your time devoted to I mean, I don't know if you have kids, Bill. I don't have kids, but my sister has kids. And I've been living with them and able to witness, you know, what is it like to raise kids at a young age.
Yes.
And it is so unbelievable. I so honor parents
Yeah.
who devote themselves, make such extraordinary sacrifices to care for their children. Um, I don't know how parenthood is compatible with like modern day capitalism
It's tough.
and the pressures of owning or affording your home and
Sure.
of rising food costs. So I think that's there. And I want to say also about this bill that I think this is deliberate. This is by design. This is not accidental. I think the centering of money has been a part of why we have lost some of these real communal practices. For example, in time of World War II, when the United States was trying to ration food for the war effort, 75% of domestic food production came from people's front yard gardens. They were called victory gardens, and it was a campaign the U.S. Inspired to get people to grow their own food.
Yeah.
And then when the 1950s rolled around after the war, there were a lot of corporations that wanted to make TV dinners, that wanted people to buy these convenient meals. And there was an active, not only marketing, but also like physical barriers erected or other challenges put in place to prevent people from growing their own food in their front yards. There was zoning laws and codes written about why that's unsightly or not correct anymore.
Right.
And it was part of a lobbying effort essentially to make sure that these corporations could sell their products and didn't have to compete with people growing their own food anymore, for example, right? So then we have to depend on that. But of course, we have to earn the money to buy that food. You know what I mean? And so that's one small example.
Yeah.
These big houses that you're talking about that used to house 3 generations of American families, developers saw the opportunity to make more money. If you have one home that fits, 2 families, and you can charge $1,000 a month for it, you could divide it in 2, and you could charge $600 for each home, and you can make $1,200. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a big opportunity to make money, and it comes at the cost so often of our communal bonds with one another. That's what I'm trying to learn about with GatherFor. How do we remember? How do we return to these communal practices that we have been made to forget and that we have been blocked from putting into practice? That's, I think, a really important question for us as a culture right now.
Teju gives us plenty more to chew on here. The first for me is the definition of culture he cited, which is our preferred way of meeting our needs. It's a pretty simple but profound way of putting it, and I think it's worth asking ourselves just what is our preferred way? And yes, working, parenting, life in general right now is awfully tiring. I'm wired to think that it's always been this way. I think of the exhausting work that so many of our ancestors did. And yet, the examples that Teju provides support the idea that more community and less solitariness could go a long way towards helping us feel more rested and at peace. Getting back to our conversation, I asked Teju if he could describe some more specifics about his work and how GatherFor tries to build community.
What we've tried to do is organize neighbors into teams to support each other and to build the kind of community that they want. And so we have created neighbor teams in a place called Brownsville in Brooklyn, where we're piloting. We're early in our journey there. But Brownsville is the largest concentration of public housing in the country. So it's a lot of low income Black and brown people living very densely in about 2 square miles, essentially. And so there's 100,000 people packed into that 2 square miles living in these big high-rise buildings in a lot of cases. And they are undocumented immigrants, survived domestic violence. A lot of folks are unhoused or wrestle with housing and food. And so it's in this context in which we've been organizing neighbors into teams. And so we have what are called neighbor teams, which are groups of 5 that essentially the goal is to support each other like a family, to be there for each other, to share stories, to listen to each other, also to celebrate birthdays, also to watch each other's kids, also to pool funds so they can pay each other's bills or help one another pay each other's bills, so they can rally around one another in times of difficulty. So we have neighbor teams that do that. And then we've just started a new initiative called action teams. Action teams are groups of, let's say, 8 to 15 neighbors who get together to accomplish a particular mission. And so that mission could be around housing or around childcare or around mental health, around entrepreneurship, around getting repairs done, around getting the city to change something. And so we resource those teams as well with some funding, mentorship, and connections. But the idea is that, again, in community, we have everything we need. And so the community itself needs to know how to help someone in a housing crisis, how to help someone considering suicide, how to help someone who doesn't know where to turn for childcare support, how to help someone who wants to start a business and that's their only option as an undocumented immigrant to start a legal livelihood in this country and doesn't know how to begin. What if the community had that wisdom and that knowledge? What would that look like? And so that's what we're trying to learn with our work. And so we try to, it's basically organizing that layer, and then around it we try to provide financial resources by way of support. So every neighbor team and every action team has some funding. I can tell you more. And then every neighbor team and every action team has some connections and links to others, whether they're partners or mentors, who can help them as well. And so that's essentially what we're building, and we're trying to do it in this container of self-governance, where the neighbors themselves are increasingly making decisions about how does GatherFor manifest and show up in the community? How do we discuss these things and make plans all together? So that's what we're trying to figure out in Brownsville.
How does GatherFor get involved in the first place? What is your entree? What is your calling card that you go to a development in Brownsville and you're welcomed and people say, let's work together?
Yes, it has not gone like that.
That's why I asked the question, Teju. I had a feeling.
Well, so we started GatherFor in the pandemic, and when we started, we just had local folks who knew Brownsville, which I don't, put up flyers in different parts of the neighborhood. And the flyers read something like, dear neighbor, this pandemic is tough on all of us, but you do not have to go through it alone. You can join together with a group of your neighbors and navigate ups and downs together. And, we just offered that invitation, and it was enough to get 8 people to sign up. And those 8 people, through word of mouth, let other people know. And we're 50 people, so we're still piloting. We're very early in our work, but yeah, that's how it's grown, through word of mouth, predominantly to those folks. We started with storytelling, in these groups. I think stories are really important because people know their own experience and people have a lot to say, especially when they've been going through difficult things. But we always invite people when they're starting in our neighbor teams to share stories that remind them of what they're here for, what they care about, what's powerful, about them, and what's meaningful to them. And so in our very first meetings with new neighbor teams, we ask people to share a story of someone who is special to them. It could be a child, a parent, it could be a friend, it could be a teacher, it could be anybody. After that, we asked them to tell stories of times when people were there for them and times that they were there for other people. And what were the conditions that enabled support to be given and to be received? And then we asked, so what then as a group would we need to put in place in order to support each other, to be willing to support each other, and to be willing to receive support from each other? And both of those directions are very important in building real relationship, because real relationship is reciprocal.
Yes.
We use basically that kind of storytelling based approach to guide neighbor teams through everything. We ask later on people to tell stories of things that they have gone through that were difficult, that they are proud of how they handled. And that provides insight into what is the resiliency of this group? What kinds of ways of solving problems have people figured out? People start to touch and remember their own power and their own capability. And I think that's a very important practice, especially for people who are impoverished, people who are Black and brown, people who are in any way marginalized, because there are a million messages telling you you are not powerful. You do not have what it takes to make it, and yet they have made it to this moment. They are here. And that says something about their capability, and they need to connect with that. And when they share it as a story, other people receive it, that is so powerful. So through telling stories, they connect with their own power, and they build trust with each other. And then they weave those into practices, and that forms culture. And once they have those shared cultural practices, then they have some things that they can fall back on when they need it. And they can start to work toward things like watching each other's kids or pooling funds to pay off bills.
The work that GatherFor is doing in Brownsville is remarkable, and it takes a lot of courage for a guy like Teju to place himself in a large, fractured community like this to try to help. And back to Teju learning lessons from the past and his own heritage, the tactics they encourage are nothing new. We used to do a much better job as a society getting to know our neighbors, sharing stories, and helping each other out. There's not some crazy new idea being advocated here, just the thought of getting back to old values that used to be a part of our society's fabric. Next, Teju reflected on the idea that many newcomers are used to stronger communities in their home countries, so GatherFor's work definitely resonates with them.
So many of our participants are immigrants who are longing for community, and they're shocked and stunned. I have one neighbor in our community who is from St. Lucia, and she always says, like, when you go to the fish market, the person who's selling you the fish, their uncle, their
Right.
aunt, their kids, you watch their kids sometimes. Like, it's not like you're just buying a fish, like this person is deeply integrated into your life, and
Right.
and everyone is willing to help you. If you need someone to watch your kid, you don't need to call someone and schedule them. You walk into the street with your child and you say, "Hey, can you watch this kid? Like, I gotta go to the market," and someone will be like, "Yeah, sure." Can you imagine that, Bill?
No.
It's so cool. I mean,
Yeah.
And this is why I'm like, we have so much to learn in America from the immigrants who come here. We keep thinking of immigrants as like mouths to feed, instead of like hands to help and people who are bringing enrichment and creativity and new ideas to our country. And so, yes, I do think that is a practice in a lot of other places. And unfortunately, it's being eroded because of, the ways that we're practicing economy and capitalism right now, and the spread of those ideas to all parts of the world. We don't really talk about globalization so much these days for some reason, but it is very much, I think, tearing at the fabric all across the world. How can we reverse that direction, at least in terms of remembering the power of community and how vital it is to our lives? So yes, I think you're exactly right. We are trying to, people very much do say like, "Oh, this reminds me of what I used to do back home." Yeah.
Yeah. And another difference from back home, I would think in a lot of these cases, to get the kinds of things they need and address concerns they have, you're dealing with bureaucracies. And so let's talk about the New York City Housing Authority. So for people who aren't familiar, Brooklyn is a borough of New York City. So you live in this gigantic borough. I think it'd be like the third or fourth most populated city in America if it were its own city, Brooklyn. So, and let's just say dealing with the New York City Housing Authority isn't always the easiest thing. So can you talk about your role and GatherFor's role in helping out these folks? And particularly, we have to talk about the kindness party as a deadline, because it's one of the most clever ideas I've ever heard. So that's a big open-ended question, but if you could just sort of walk us through how you helped out with the NYCHA, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, like I said, Brownsville is the largest concentration of public housing in North America. And so as we thought about expanding GatherFor, we have wanted to get it into public housing buildings. Like, what if all these public housing buildings, all the residents within them were organized into our neighbor teams and we're supporting each other? How cool would that be? And that could be a scalable model. That was my thought when I got to know the Tenant Association president of Glenmore Plaza, which is a New York City Housing Authority development in Brownsville. And a New York City Housing Authority, which is abbreviated to NYCHA or NYCHA, is the largest housing authority in North America. They oversee some, I think 300,000 apartments. There are about 500,000 people living in NYCHA, which is
Wow.
that's a city right there, just in public housing in New
Yep.
York. And so it's beleaguered, it's
Huge.
besieged, it's under resourced, it's got a lot to deal with. And it's unfortunately also faced a lot of challenges with corruption. I think just last month or 2 months ago, there were some 70 arrests made by the Justice Department. All of them were NYCHA employees who had engaged in bribery and corruption in some way. And so there's a lot of
Wow.
challenges with regard to public housing. Anyway, we went to Glenmore Plaza.
Sure.
I met with Miriam Robertson, who's the tenant association president there. And I said, hey, we've got this thing we're doing with GatherFor. It's cool. It's exciting. Let's try it in your building. And she was like, well, I don't make the decisions, but I can facilitate you getting connected to our board.
Yeah.
And you can talk to them. So I met with the board, and the board was like, well, we don't make the decisions, but you can talk to the residents and at our next general meeting. So I went to the general meeting, and it was unlike any experience I've had, Bill, because there were 30 people there. There's probably 1,000 people living in this development, so not everyone is very active in these general meetings. But 30 people came, and the
Right.
super of the building,
Sure.
who's an employee of NYCHA, and the manager of the building were there, and they were essentially, they just said like, hey, when you have any issues with your apartments, when you need any repairs, just put in a work order. Call this number, get a work order for the issue, and we'll come check it out. And a lot of the residents were saying, we've done it, we've gone through the process, but y'all haven't done anything in years and years and years and years. And so many people had these stories of repairs that had gone unaddressed. One woman, Barbara Cole, told the story about how she moved into the building and she had seizures when she moved in. And so her doctors told her, please get a grab bar installed in your bathroom. God forbid you should have a seizure while you're in the tub. You fall and can really get hurt. So get housing to get that grab bar in there so you have something to hold on to. She called them. She put in a work order. She followed the proper protocol. They did nothing. She called them again. She called them again. She called them again. They did nothing. They did nothing, Bill, for 27 years. And in that time, sadly, she had a seizure in the tub. She fell. She hit her head. She had to go to the ER. She had to have brain surgery, Bill. She had to take 6 months to recover. After that, she repeated her requests to get NYCHA to install a grab bar. They didn't do it. And so these were the stories that were all told before I got to go and give this talk about GatherFor. And so then Miriam Robertson, the TA president, is like, okay, Teju, come tell us about GatherFor. And I was like, okay, I just don't feel like I could do that because what y'all have described is horrific. And I started a little bit, but people were checked out. They were not interested. And so I just asked, have you ever come together as a community and tried to address this as one?
Right.
And they said no. And I said, why? And they said, because we don't really know each other. We don't really trust each other. I said, what do you mean? Y'all are here at this meeting. And they said, well, yeah, but you don't know what it's like here. Like every day when you walk down the hallway, you'll see people at night with needles in their arms passed out in the hall. At night, unhoused people break into our lobbies and they will sleep there. And sometimes it means they urinate or defecate in the stairwells or outside of our doors. There are drug deals that go down all over the building. There's people getting assaulted or harassed in the elevators, which are very, very small. Like there's so many issues. So the best thing you can do is just keep your head down. Don't look anyone in the eye and go about your business and don't get involved in anybody else's business. One person even said, I wouldn't knock on my neighbor's door because I wouldn't want to start something like a fight, But this is a setup. And it's in this context that I'm like, let's all take care of each other as neighbors. Wouldn't that be great?
Hey, here's Teju.
So I was like, okay, how to make this Pollyannish idea seem very practical. And so I was a bit discouraged, but I spoke to a mentor of mine, Robbie Block, who is a housing organizer who's very, very good, one of the best in the city. And he's very generous and shares a lot of insights with me. And I said, Robbie, how do you go about getting people to get together and change housing and change housing policy? And he gave me a process, which essentially is like, you you get a team together that can collect all the repair needs. You collect the repair needs. So you're like your list of demands. You go to the right official at NYCHA. You let them know the demands, and you have to get them to show up to a meeting, ideally with the press, where they have to make a promise or a commitment about how they're going to address the repairs of the issues. And so it's like, okay, that's pretty good. And then I was a bit worried though, because it was kind of like, these folks already don't have a good relationship with NYCHA. They really, and they're going to sort of threaten NYCHA with bad press in this process, which NYCHA is used to, and they get a lot of bad press around all the time. They're very sensitive to it.
Sure.
So meanwhile, I have this friend named Jordan, and Jordan is queer, trans, non-binary, and they lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and because of their gender identity, they would walk home sometimes from work, and people would harass them. People would throw trash at them, call them names, even launch fireworks at them.
Oh, God.
And so they tried to call the police. They tried to appeal to public officials, to Neighborhood Watch, but nothing worked. And so a mentor of theirs, Anuj Bandari, suggested that they do something to meet these harassers and shake their hands, which gave Jordan the idea of organizing a block party. And so Jordan organized this great block party, got Shake Shack to come and give free ice cream, had Whole Foods come and give away free pizzas, and there was chalk art and music, and it was just a lot of fun. And 400 people showed up, including those that were harassing Jordan. And Jordan was handing out water bottles and hands one to one person, looks up, and it's one of the main people who's been harassing Jordan. And so they have this conversation, and this guy's like, "You did this? You put this together?" Jordan's like, "Yeah, I guess I did." And this person's like, "This is amazing. Never seen anything like this in our community." And it totally changed their relationship. After that, they always said, "Hey, Jordan, how you doing?" Never teased Jordan, never harassed Jordan. Sometimes they'd even protect Jordan from other people, or walk with them home to make sure that they were safe on their way home. It totally changed their relationship. I was so blown away by Jordan's story that I was like, okay, we need to combine what Jordan's told me with what Robbie's told me. So I went back to the general meeting of residents. We tried to flyer the whole community and make sure a lot of people turned up. So we had a big turnout for this meeting. Maybe it was 70 people instead of 30. I basically told them this idea. I was like, y'all, let's throw a block party, And I tried to explain that we need to go collect the repairs. We need a door knocking team. We need these things. And there was a lot of skepticism. A lot of people in the room were like, I wish there were another idea. I wish you really had something. But there were 8 women who said, I think we got to try something. And at least this is something. So let's try it. And they volunteered. And in a first meeting that we had together, I said, why do you want to do this? And they said, we want to be proud of the building in which we lived. And so the group decided to call itself the Glenmore Proud. So they all with that core idea at the heart. And so the Glenmore Proud, the 8 women of the Glenmore Proud, spent nights and weekends knocking on all 440 apartment doors of the apartment complex and collecting on these little slips of paper, these little forms that we had printed, everyone's repair needs. And there were people who were like not answering their door, who didn't want to do it, who didn't care, but they kept coming back and they kept coming back. And the neighbors were suddenly like, y'all again, like I can set my watch by you, And eventually people started filling out these forms. And then we went to NYCHA and we said, here is a spreadsheet of all of the repairs that we've compiled from the whole community. We'd like you to get these fixed. We'd like to bring to your attention that some of these haven't been addressed in something like 29 years. Here's Barbara Cole's story. And we're going to throw a block party in 3 months to celebrate you getting all of this done. We're going to invite everybody in the community. We're going to invite the press. Everyone's going to be there. And it's going to be a chance to say, thank you, NYCHA. Whatever in the past has happened, like y'all really made this happen. And we appreciate that you did it. And we're throwing you this party. And NYCHA was shook. They were like, what? We have never get this. This is not how it goes. And they agreed to do it. We gave the spreadsheet to the executive vice president in charge of repairs for all of Brooklyn. So he's probably the third or fourth most powerful person at NYCHA, and he agreed to do it, and he made it happen. He made these, he got all the people he needed to get on it. He got the whole hierarchy to work, and they made, Bill, 1,600 repairs in 60 days. Remember Barbara Cole's grab bar that hadn't been fixed in 29 years? They fixed it 2 days after they got our email. They just went crazy, and they made all these repairs. They responded to almost 90% of what residents had said was broken and needed to be fixed, and they did it in 60 days. And then we had this block party, and we had about 300, 400 people show up. We gave away free food to the community. We had music, we had games, we had giveaways, we had all sorts of fun. And then it totally transformed the culture of the building. People went from avoiding eye contact to hugging each other, to checking up on each other, to saying, hey, your power's out, I'm calling NYCHA for you. There was a total shift in the community, and it really helped people see, in community, we have everything we need. We can even get this big bad bureaucracy to play ball with us for the first time, and we can do it in the way that we like to do it, which is through barbecue and through bouncy houses for our kids and through music and dance and those kinds of things that happen at the block party, and not through angry pitchfork mobbing, which is also an important community organizing strategy sometimes.
Sure.
But it felt right, and it felt more aligned with this community to do it in this way. And so, that was how we got to build trust with the Glenmore Plaza community.
It's an incredible story. And I think about if I put myself in the shoes of the NYCHA people, here you come with this list, and you say you have 3 months, and they're thinking, or we're going to call the New York Times, or Channel 7 is going to come out with a truck and cover this disaster. Instead, you say, we're going to have a celebration in 3 months. Total mind shift for them. It's a really interesting way to think about, breaching these divides that we might have with anyone, but particularly these big bureaucracies who, Frank, like you said, there's probably some great people at NYCHA. They just have a really brutal job, and they're constantly being threatened, and they're understaffed. So instead, you present it's. I don't even know if it's a carrot versus a stick. It's I don't know, catching more flies with honey. Just treating them with this respect and this lovely idea that at the end of this, I'm guessing too, when NYCHA people actually were in the buildings doing these repairs, they learned a lot about these tenants. They had a new appreciation for what their lives are like, just how bad it was. So, like you said, the next time that neighbor says, "Oh, I'm going to call them to get this, light fixture fixed," they've got a different relationship now with that development.
You're right, 100%. That's exactly right.
You have to admire the bravery of a guy like Teju, a complete outsider to this Brownsville community, stepping into the middle of it to try to help. There's a lot we can learn from him. First, he's clearly a resilient person who doesn't shy away from challenges and obstacles. Second, notice how he's open to mentorship and reaches out to a person with deep experience in dealing with housing authority bureaucracy. And lastly, he's really creative. And the idea of telling NYCHA that GatherFor will proactively plan for a celebration of the completion of work they've yet to even agree to do is downright brilliant. And the outcome of these efforts is heartwarming. Now, to our final segment with Blue Sky guest, Teju Ravilochan. Okay, Teju, I've gotten to know you a little bit. You are not going to be satisfied with Brownsville only. Where does GatherFor go from here? Because I'm sensing now this sense of optimism and proof that these things can work. What is your master plan? And if someone is listening out there who thinks, gosh, I could be doing this in my community, do they work with you? Do they copy your ideas? Where does this go from here?
Yes. Well, first of all, let me just say, these are not my ideas. These are our ancestral ideas. These are old ideas that we know, secretly all this stuff lives in us, right? And so
makes a lot of sense.
This is just what our grandmothers did, or this is just, we can do this. All of us can do this. I'm not saying it's easy. It takes time. It's hard to talk to your neighbor. It's hard to build trust with them. It's not easy, but we're able to do it. It's within our capabilities. And that's what I want this to be the work of. I don't want this to be the extraordinary efforts of extraordinary people. I want this to be the ordinary efforts of ordinary people. Because to me, that
Yep.
is the kind of work that will scale and grow and change our culture. And so, anyone can do this. We can do this with devotion and with sincerity. And so, please reach out. Please, let's work together. Let's learn from each other. But, yes, I hope that this is what neighborhoods can be like, where we are working together and supporting each other. And, I think we're learning that people do need guidance and stories. They need stories about what have others done that are like me to address challenges like the one I'm facing in front of me. People
Yep.
also need specific tools, templates, patterns that they can follow. So I learned from Robbie, who has done community organizing work for a long time, and I learned from Jordan. Both of them told me stories that made me
Yeah.
realize like what's possible, and also they gave me some structure for how to go about it. And so we can share our structure. We would love to. I think what we're after is we're still learning the cultural conditions that allow a small community to meet its own needs and take care of itself. What if at Glenmore Plaza, we take this trust that we have now developed and say, okay, let's be a community sufficient building, meaning let's have our own gardens in this building where
Yeah.
that can provide fresh food to everybody in the building. Let's form childcare co-ops where we can watch each other's kids, not necessarily with money, but again, like in the Indian village or like, in days of yore, through community, someone takes a couple of people take Mondays, a couple of people take Tuesdays, a couple of people take Wednesdays, depending on work shifts. And of course, you have to build trust. You have to have conversations about how do we discipline children? What do children eat? What are their allergies? How do we keep our children safe? How do we talk to our children? Those are all things as a community that need to be talked through and agreed upon first. So maybe there's a training or a certification or something that says like, we trust you because we know you've been part of these dialogues, whatever it is. But also maybe that this development can have its own peacekeeping circle to deal with conflicts or violence that happens in the building. There's a lot of things that can happen within one building or within one community. And so our vision is to grow GatherFor to the size of the neighborhood in Brownsville, and not necessarily then sequentially, but and also to begin to plant this seed of in community we have everything we need in other neighborhoods and other communities across the country. And so I think we are approaching a time of readiness to do that. We're building more digital infrastructure to accompany the relational
Yep.
infrastructure that we have. We have a platform that does shared bank accounts essentially, where people can pool their funds and
Wow.
where every neighbor team can manage their own little group of funds, for instance. We are trying to, over time, build the kind of technology where people can find people in the community that they have common ground with, so they can easily form teams. We have a workbook with all the storytelling prompts that I was telling you about, which maybe we could share. So we're trying to build the infrastructure to make this more viable and possible. I do get asked about scale a lot, and I'm excited for scale. And I want to say that, like, before a forest, just blossoms, right? There's this time of rooting down and building
Sure.
real relationship between the seeds and the soil, and making sure that things are well nourished. And we are in that phase of
Yep.
still, building early trust. We had to do a lot. We had to get a whole government agency to make thousands of repairs just to build trust with a
Yeah.
development of people,
Sure.
and
Sure.
that was just a precursor to the work that we want to start in the building,
Sure.
right? And so it's trust building work, and it takes time. It's not app building work, which can grow to a million of people
Yeah.
very, very
Right.
fast. But it
Right.
is the missing infrastructure that I think that we really need to return to. We once had, but we need to rebuild in our country. And so if people are willing to participate in that, if we work together, we can do this. I mean, lots of people trying these experiments and learning together, having a community of practice together. How powerful could that be, for neighborhoods to learn from each other? We are learning from so many. We could be learning from people in your audience, Bill, how they are doing this. How are they organizing shared childcare? How are they organizing co-housing across the country? Housing is unaffordable, so families are finding interesting ways to room together and watch each other's kids, and that's making housing affordable where we can't all control if a new building is going to be built with apartments in it or not. There are people who have figured out how to do urban gardening in an extraordinary way. This is the kind of stuff that we need. It's that reconnection to our own power, to ourselves, to each other, and to our earth. That's the kind of learning that I think we need to be participating in, and we're drawn to learning from as well. So yes, we want to learn from you, and we also want to share what we know with you to the extent that's helpful. We'd love to be part of a movement of this happening all across the country.
Amazing. So to the extent that, as you said, this all starts with storytelling, I am hopeful that this Blue Sky episode gets all kinds of listens and shares, and that people can hear your stories, share your stories, and then share back to you through us to help grow this, because I think you're onto something really big here, and it's a real inspiration to talk to you, Teju. And I know you're very busy, so I appreciate you taking this time to be with us today.
It's an absolute pleasure, Bill. Thank you for what you're doing. You're doing the storytelling work, so I respect that tremendously and honor what you have done. And yeah, just thank you for giving me this space. It means a lot.
Thank you. Keep up the great work. There's great hopefulness and optimism in Teju's belief in the power of ordinary efforts of ordinary people. And it's encouraging to think about the fact that pretty much all of the ideas he advocates for are old ones. We know they work, and there's no need for reinvention, just renewal of commitments to being neighborly and community-minded. And note too Teju's humility, exemplified in part by his openness to understanding what it is he doesn't know and reaching out to others to help educate him. He's a really inspiring person, and I look forward to seeing where his work takes him next. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Teju Ravilochan. Before you go, we'd appreciate you leaving us a rating or review, and hope you'll consider subscribing to our podcast to be sure you don't miss any future episodes. This and all Blue Sky episodes are made possible by the incredible editing and mixing done by the team at Sound On Studios. You can learn more about their work at soundonstudios.com. All graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute are provided by Crush Graphics. That's Crush with a K, if you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.